This was the 29th Conference of Parties. After I came back, I renamed it to Conference of Wolves. The problem is not knowledge of the problem and knowledge of the solution. The problem is putting people on the same level to see the ecological, the nature emergence. And since 75 years after independence, we have not been able to solve the problem of farmer suicide because we are addressing the symptom. The number of hospitals in Maharashtra is growth. But how healthy is the society is development. The society needs development. Growth is just a means of how you reach development. My business benefits from polluting, but the cost of pollution is borne by the entire population, tax-paying population, which means everybody. The person who is getting into no pesticide use is the biggest sufferer of the pesticides. The government is trying to solve a symptom.
Not the root cause.
Not the root cause.
A prominent sustainability and environmental management expert, Gurudas brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our conversation. With a PhD in sustainability, he has been a guiding force in understanding how industries and cities can balance economic growth with ecological responsibility. Gurudas is currently a professor and director at the Center for Sustainable Development at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. He is also a visiting professor at IIT Kanpur. He teaches the fascinating intersection of ecology and economy, inspiring the next generation to think beyond conventional boundaries. He is also an award-winning author, having penned down thought-provoking works like Anarthashastra and Shetapasun Tataparanta, both of which have received prestigious accolades. Beyond academia, Gurudas has played a pivotal role in shaping policies. Serving on numerous expert committees and contributing to initiatives by organizations such as UN, World Resource Institute, and UNICEF. We are excited to dive into an insightful conversation with Gurudas, exploring sustainability, social justice, and what lies ahead for our planet. Welcome to our podcast. Gurudas, thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And agreeing to have this conversation.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We met through the classrooms of Ecological Society. And it's a very deep, immersive environment where transformational change happens. But I realized that this change is not possible to achieve at scale unless we take that essence of that learning outside the walls of that classroom.
Absolutely.
So, in that spirit, thank you so much. And for our listeners who are not seeing this, we are sitting in a place that feels like it's a slice out of history. It's filled with tidbits of love, of culture, of heritage. We were privileged enough to have a tour of it just before we started this conversation. Just for our listeners, can you just give a brief context of where we are sitting and how does it feel to be having a conversation in this place?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the very essential things whenever you're starting a conversation is where you're starting it.
Absolutely.
And therefore, it does make sense about, the place that we are sitting at. So we are right now in the heart of Pune city. You can call it the cultural capital of the entire city. We are in Sadashivpet. And we are in a Wada. So there is no real English word for Wada, but you can call it something like between a villa and a bungalow. But Wadas essentially were large houses with a lot of open space, with a well and with trees, as well as the people who live there. And all of these used to reside very comfortably with each other. There used to be animals. We had mongoose coming here. We had civets. We had squirrels, barn owls. In my childhood, there used to be barn owls here. So on and so forth.
Amazing.
But this house is about 135 years old, which means we are the fifth generation. My daughters will be the fifth generation. We are the fourth generation here. This has seen a lot of history, and Indian history also, not just local Pune history. So, for example, my great-grandfather was part of the Indian National Congress, along with, the senior people, Firoz Shah Mehta, Bairamji, all of those. So there have been some meetings of the Indian National Congress in this house.
Amazing.
We have had the honor of having the first remembrance meeting of Savai Gandharva after he passed away. We had the privilege of being visited by the President of India at that time, Rajendra Babu Prasad.
Wow.
So this Wada has seen a lot of history. It has seen wars. It has seen the World War I, World War II. It has seen the uprisings. It has seen the political upheavals that India has been witness to. And of course, the inmates of this house, we are part of the geographic landscape here.
And the fabric of the community
and
also.
The fabric of the community. So there have been a lot of these kind of things which make up the software part of this hardware.
Amazing. In a way, it's like a keystone species. It's like an old banyan tree that has nurtured so many different, it's seen the times and the years, of course, but it's nurtured so many different communities and people. And I feel that when I'm sitting here, I feel that we are part of a community rather than I'm sitting in your house. That's a very beautiful feeling that's very rare to find nowadays. And we are in the heart of Pune. So let's get into the interesting bits. Let's start with something more current. You just came back from Baku, Azerbaijan. You attended COP29. And a lot of world events happened near this COP29 conference. Okay. For the interest of the new viewer or listener who does not know what COP29 is, we'll define it for them. But at the same time, a communique was issued from G20, which is the collective of 20 most powerful economies, right? And they are responsible for 85% of the wealth of the world, and therefore they are responsible for 85% of the ecological disruption of the world, right? So it means something that G20 has taken a decision on something. Okay, it should be paid heed to. A few weeks before that, Trump became the president of United States. And we all know Trump has openly spoken that climate crisis is a hoax. And we need not be worried about it, right? And then the COP29 happened at the backdrop of this. I, as an aspiring ecologist and a permaculturist, I'm very interested in, you were there and you were witness to this roller coaster of events that happened in Azerbaijan. And I will just leave you with the opening statement of the president of Iran when he said that
President of Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, sorry, where he said that fossil fuels are a gift from God, and they should be treated as such. So this is worrying, but as an ecologist, we are used to being worried. What is your take on? Can you just explain for the benefit of the listeners? What is your take on everything?
So, the Conference of Parties, right, which happens every year. This was the 29th Conference of Parties.
Right.
And after I came back, I renamed it to Conference of Wolves. Because the kind of greed that you see there, the kind of negotiations you see there, I don't think anybody is really keen on having a sustainable planet for Homo sapiens.
Just for the benefit of the listeners, what is the agenda of this conference of parties? What is the ultimate objective? Why are these people convening?
Yeah, so there are three types of conference of parties. One which happened a month ago, which was COP16. That was on the Convention for Biological Diversity, which happened in Colombia and Cali. The next one is the COP29, which happened in Azerbaijan and Baku. And there's another one happening, which will be in Riyadh, which will be the UNCCD. UNCCD is the United Nations Framework for Combating Desertification. That's another conference of parties which happening. So this particular one, which I visited, COP29, is about the financing part of it. Is how do you finance the adaptation and mitigation measures?
Understood.
What are the commitments that countries need to make for making a sustainable planet? What are the actions? What are the targets? All of these are discussed in the Conference of Parties. This happens once every year. So just to put the record straight, and you talked about what the president of Azerbaijan said, Ilham Aliyev is his name. He came out and said it's a gift of God, not just that, but we are at the end of a social media slander and blackmail campaign on how fossil fuels are bad for the planet. Immediately after his speech, the United Nations director came out and said, we don't have space for such things, such talk. So look at the difference in the scales. One person here is saying, the presidency is saying that we are facing the brunt of the climate damage, the blackmail. And the other person is saying completely opposite views. The negotiations happened over a 2-week period. And it was as disappointing as expected. Disappointing to the extent that, the developing and the poor countries were expecting a $1 trillion kind of a loss and damage fund package. And this was decided at Dubai. Just look at where these COPs are happening. The last 3 COPs happened in Egypt, Dubai, Azerbaijan.
All oil rich.
All oil rich. And the next one is Brazil. 60% of this economy is coming from fossil fuel. So they're very, very rich countries in fossil fuel. Why does this happen? And what were the outcomes? One of the outcomes was that there was no agreement upon actions and the speed of actions and the targets. There was no agreement upon amount of funds that would be deployed for the loss and damages. If you think about it, the root of the foundation of economy and economic growth is upon fossil fuel. You take fossil fuel out of the picture, you don't have an economy.
Correct.
There's nothing there, including our agriculture. It's completely fossil fuel agriculture. So the countries which benefit the most from this are the countries which have the largest reserves of oil. And thus, it is very difficult for them to let go of fossil fuel as a means of economic growth.
100%.
Right. And that has been the story at every COP, successively in the last 29 COPs. There have been some very good agreements which came out at Paris, which was COP, the 2015 COP. And people felt very happy that the kind of agreements that were reached. But from 2015 till 2024, there's not been action which warrants whatever has been done. So economic growth, if it is founded upon the consumption of fossil fuel, then countries don't want to go of their means to wealth, which is fossil fuel. We know that solar energy, wind energy is not going to take the place of fossil fuel because fossil fuel is such dense energy.
Yeah, that is impossible.
Absolutely.
That calorific value cannot be
very
achieved.
high calorific value and very high energy density.
Right.
On the other hand, solar energy is not dense. Solar energy, you need thousands of acres to
High
make,
entropy.
let's say, a couple of megawatts of.
Yeah.
So that becomes a fundamental understanding about why nations don't want to do it. India, for example, is on the other side of the scale. Most of our fiscal deficit is coming from imports of fossil fuel. So we stand to benefit if fossil fuel is reduced because we will have a localized source of energy. And that localized source of energy will put money in the pockets of Indians. Right now we are putting money in the pockets of OPEC countries and Ukraine and Alaska and whoever is supplying the oil, Iran, Iraq, all of that. So India is a very significant beneficiary if nations move away from fossil fuel as a thing into this. So that is the contentious part which happens in COP every year, and that's why people.
There was even a news wire that leaked a audio clip of the president of COPs actually promoting fossil fuels, and he's trying to do under the table deals with people to push fossil fuels and to push petroleum.
We saw that, we heard that.
So this seems like a hoax.
Yeah, on the face of it. I mean, hoax is a very strong word, but yeah, I mean, it's lack of intentions, lack of actions.
So it's really scary because we have been studying climate data for a while, right? And we know that there is not much time left.
Yeah.
Scientists there is a reason why everyone agreed to the 1.5 degree mark. Because the balance of this biosphere is going to tremendously change. From my experience as a farmer, we can forget about the seasons. They have gone, right? And the Holocene, the stability of the seasons was what caused the Holocene, which was the longest, most beautiful, fruitful, stable period that humanity could witness, right? But are we so blindsided by it or so arrogant to realize that the seasons are breaking? Like we are realizing it in cities also, right? Like some years are very hot, some years are very cold. It rains sporadically throughout the year and stuff like that. So I think the theme here that emerges is that of thinking long term versus transactional or short term. This Wada is a great example of thinking long term. You nurturing it and still holding on to it in a way that is ecologically sustainable also. Is also a long term view on things, right? I want to get into, before we get into other things, I want to get into the contradiction. So if you want to make money, okay, for example, I think all of this is happening because people are greedy and they want to make money. If you want to make money, isn't it in your best interest to protect the environment so that you can continue to make money for a longer time? So one thing that's always interested me is, and I'm asking this specifically to you because you have a background in economics. So most of the pension funds, which are the highest lenders of money today in the world, okay? The pension fund is US made, it's 401ks or whatever. So when you are done serving your term, they need to take care of you throughout your life, right? It has to be in their best interest to ensure that the planet survives for another 100 years and the stability continues, right? Why is this not happening? Now, why are people not realizing that the health of the planet is synchronous to your physical and mental and financial health? Why is this connection not happening? Where is the break? What do you think is the reason for this?
So it's a loaded question. You've asked a couple of questions in one question, and I will break it up into a couple of parts. One is understanding how climate works, how climate change works. Second is understanding how businesses work.
Right.
So let's first look at the first part, that how climate change works. Climate change results in at least two different types of impacts. The first is the short run impact, like a cyclone, a drought, an intense rainfall, a cloudburst, storms brewing up, periods of extended rains not following, such things, which directly impact the economy. And climate change also has an impact upon long-term, has a very long-term impact, which is ocean acidification, melting of polar ice caps, extinction of species, methane outbursts like it's happening in Siberia, so on and so forth. These happened over, let's say, 100 years, right? So the first part of the climate impact
It's easy to capture.
is not just easy to capture, it affects the economy and the businesses.
but immediate.
It happens right now. So these impacts are today, here and now.
Right.
And the other impacts are for future
Long
generations. That's how climate change works. Now let's look at how businesses work. Businesses work for today, right? One part of it works for the future, but a large part of it works for today. And if you're working for today, it's in your best interest to take as much of natural resources and convert it into rupees. Right. So this becomes an understanding because the CEOs and CXOs need to report to the board every quarter or once in a year or twice in a year.
Right.
And the board is about return on investment. It doesn't care about...
And the average term at best is 5 years, 7 years, 10 years maybe. I don't think any board is thinking beyond 7 to 10
Beyond
years.
that. The long range plan in business terms is about 7 years or 10 years at max. Right. So that's one part of it. So when you are reporting to a board about return on investments, you don't want to tell them that we have saved ocean acidification, which is going to happen after 70 years. Or we are going to save the boreal forest, which is going to go dead in another 50 years or whatever. You want to tell them that we have created this value. And this value creation is all about money, which is the financial capital.
Correct.
But think about GDP growth, right? Gross domestic product, which we measure for a nation, and profitability, which we measure for business. Every rupee that we make, that we generate, consumes natural resources. Look at what we are wearing. You know, I'm wearing cotton kurta. It's come from the earth. We are sitting on a chair made of minerals. There's a table in front of us which is made of timber. We are sitting in a building which is made of bricks. It's made of clay. The cement is made from gypsum, limestone, energy, what have you. You've traveled by car. You burned petrol. Every rupee that you make in the GDP or in your business has consumed natural resources. That's the bottom line. Which means that when we say that the profits must rise, the revenue must rise, the GDP must rise, we know that resources are going to be depleted. It's not something...
It's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game. So what that means is the generation of financial capital is completely based upon the presence of natural capital.
And the extraction of natural capital, if we may say so.
So the natural capital, there are at least about two different kinds of natural. One is the non-renewable resources, like minerals, like things which you take, fossil fuel, coal, all of that. And then you have the renewable resources, which is soil, water, air, sunlight, wind, all of that.
Yeah.
What we are doing to the non-renewable resources is we are depleting them at a rate which is highest in history of humankind. In the Homo sapien history, this is the highest rate of resource use today, natural resource use of the non-renewable resources, which means we are already taking things that actually belong to the future generations.
Yeah.
If you go to the Indian Bureau of Mines website, they have a list of stocked out mines, exhausted mines. It's a long list of about a few hundred mines which don't exist anymore. They're in shambles, you know, the land is degraded, the mineral is stocked out, and things have happened. What about the renewable resources? Every business, every country needs renewable resources. We need water, we need air, we need soil, we need sunlight, all of that. What we are doing to the non-renewable resources is depletion. What we are doing to renewable resources, pollution. We can't drink out of a river. We can't drink out of a lake. The soil that we use today to grow our food has already degraded. It's loaded with toxins. So we pollute the non-renewable resources to the extent that they are usable only after treating it with technology. Which means we have to burn carbon to treat the pollution.
Exactly. The energy equation.
Yeah. So this becomes a double whammy for nature. You know, on one side it's depleting, on the other side is the non-renewable resources are depleting and the renewable resources are getting polluted. So now non-renewable resources are depleting is a business problem. That is, my input costs are increasing. But so be it, I can raise my prices. Right? So if price of steel goes up, let's say from 80 to 90, I'll jack up my end product prices from whatever to whatever. This is easy to do. And consumers also realize, अरे हाँ ये बढ़ गया, पेट्रोल का दाम बढ़ गया, इसलिए हम prices ज़्यादा देने पड़ते हैं. We take this in our stride, but we don't realize that when our input costs go up, that's a sign of something going wrong in nature. It's not a sign of inflation.
That's an economic indicator.
Yes, of ecological damage. That is something which is happening. And on the other hand, when we pollute, we pay to mitigate that pollution. We pay to remove that pollution. And those costs also we can add up to our end product. So for businesses, it doesn't matter.
And anyway, it's not the true cost.
Because one is that it's not the true cost, it's a fictitious cost. But the second part is the damage that we have done to our renewable resources is for a large portion borne by taxpayers' money, by the government. It's not borne by corporations. So polluted rivers is a problem of the government. They need to look at it. They need to treat the sewage. They need to purify the water. They need to do that. So my business benefits from polluting, but the cost of pollution is borne by the entire population, tax-paying population, which means everybody. Not just income taxpayers, but we also pay GST. So the poorest of the people also pay the goods and services tax, which also goes into that. So this is what in economics is what is called as externalized cost. Thus, the ecological problems stop at businesses' doorsteps. They don't enter the business. It's looked at a input cost output price problem. So this climate problem, ecological problem comes and stops at the gates of business and becomes an operational problem. It becomes a problem of my input costs are rising. It becomes a problem of in the hyper competition, I need to raise my prices. They don't see the real world picture that the input costs are rising because something is depleted or something is affected or there is some problem in the ecology. So an ecological problem is transformed into a business problem.
My God, there are so many questions that arise from here. But let's tackle it one by one. I'll just spell these out so that we don't miss them. But one is that now suddenly from the business's problem, it has become the government's problem. Because it is now affecting the welfare or well-being of the people, right? The second is while we remain in the economics of it, there is an elasticity to demand, right? Like there is a limit to which there are some things that are fairly inelastic, like cigarettes, right? They used to cost 2 rupees, now they cost, I guess, 20 rupees and people still buy and smoke them, okay? So based on perceived value and stuff like this, there is elasticity of demand. But I would imagine that there would come one time when people would say this is too much, right? Like a business can only increase costs
up to one level.
Up to a level after which it starts seeing damage to its top line and the consumption reduces. And now they suddenly have to start thinking about costs, the engineering costs, and the ecological costs and stuff like that. I guess till now what they must be doing is they must just be dumping or abandoning one site, going to another site, exploiting that site. If they're out of sites from their country, they will go to a third world country and they'll start exploiting that. But what happens when, and this is a scary question, and we'll come to the government a bit later, but what happens when it sort of comes to a point where the cost is just unaffordable to anybody?
Yeah. So that's a good question. What you're essentially asking is what happens when there is an relatively inelastic demand and businesses can no longer afford to buy that. This problem in business is solved by substitution. When a resource becomes so expensive that it can no longer be taken as a business input and converted into an output, then it is substituted with something else. Right? And we have seen that nearly every substitution that the world has done has been more ecologically damaging. So for example,
wood to plastic.
Exactly. And I was just going to show where we are sitting, right? All my doors which you saw in my house are wooden doors.
Yeah.
In today's houses, it is substituted by plywood. Plastic. In some houses, it is substituted by plastic. Because why? The input costs of wood are very high. But a plastic door is far more environmentally damaging than a wooden door. Because 100%. Wood is a renewable resource. And that renewability happens in a 50-year time frame, right? So you can have plantations of wood which can be used for making resources. But plastic, you're using a non-renewable resource. You're using crude oil, converting it into plastic by burning emissions, by burning carbon emissions, and then putting it into a door frame which has got a life far less than a wooden door. And after the end of life, it's going to end up as pollution.
Correct.
So in the life cycle of substitution, we have always seen that substitutes have been more ecologically damaging than the original thing. Look at everything, LED bulbs, for example. We feel that incandescent lamps were substituted by tube lights were substituted by LED bulbs. We have no clue what the LED bulbs are going to go and do a damage in the environment. Or, most of it is plastic, right? All the LEDs are plastic, their covers are plastic. A lot of this fossil fuel is used to make this crude oil, used to make the plastic.
Plastic, right.
So life cycle analysis thinking is not convenient and it's not done.
And it's not good for business also.
It's not good for business, it's not good for GDP growth. But ignoring life cycle analysis, you can take business decisions. You can substitute. So substitution always overcame the problem of rising input costs. And you can see this everywhere. In cars, the materials which are used in cars today are substituted significantly.
They have plastic houses now.
Yeah, you have plastic dashboards, you have plastic fenders, bumpers, lights. Most of it is replaced by plastic. Earlier it was minerals. Mineral cost started rising, so it was substituted. Many other examples like this, you can see that substitution has led to higher damages and better business sense.
So where does this monkey business end? Like, how do you visualize this? Like, I visualize one day I'll go to a petrol pump and I'll ask for petrol and there will be no petrol. For example, that will be one. But what is, just for intellectual, like, how do you visualize this ending or stopping? Do you think businesses will run out of money, just dissolve because they can't figure out a way to create something out of nothing? How do you think where does this go and stop?
So it will be, my answer would be a very opinionated answer about what will happen in the future. But let's look at what could happen in the future instead of what could be the end state. What could be the pathway is a better way of thinking of that. Companies which are significantly dependent upon natural resources, and the World Economic Forum, WEF, has a definition for that. In India, 33% of businesses are highly dependent upon nature. Around 30% of businesses are moderately dependent, and about 37% are less dependent upon nature.
So 1/3.
Yeah, about 1/3 of each. So those businesses which are highly dependent upon nature might go out of business, or they might be bought over by other things. The other force which is overpowering, one is, I said, substitution. Second force is globalization. Now, if a mineral has stocked out from India and there is ample in another country, that country's businesses can come and overpower Indian businesses. So let's say we run out of steel and we need steel for manufacturing whatever we need. Another country has ample steel which is far cheaper than Indian steel. Now those companies will suddenly become more competitive and they'll be able to buy businesses here and they'll be able to establish their markets here.
Right.
So an entire sector going out of business, we definitely will see, but it's more of a push, global push which happens. So that is something which we are going to see very much in businesses.
Let's get back to the other point where you said that businesses extract and exploit as much as they can, and once the problem becomes ecological, it's the government's problem, right? What is the role of government in society, and what can the government do, assuming the government has the best interest of the people in its mind? What are the avenues available to the government to manage this issue?
Yeah. So the first part is, what is the role of the government? To understand the role of the government, let's understand the role of the economy first. since the evolution of modern economics from Adam Smith's time till today, the role of the economy is to generate financial capital. And the underlying thought behind that is that economic growth solves all problems. Right? Which means as societies generate more income for them, it will generate more taxes. That taxes will result in more equitable material conditions. Those equitable material conditions will result in more employment opportunities, more people making money, and
Quality
overall
of
the
life.
society going up in affluence. That is the underlying thought. But the economic history has shown us that this doesn't happen. So before that, so for this to happen, we have what is called as the free market economy concept. That is, the government should not meddle in markets. Let the markets decide their own price, what they want to manufacture, how they want to manufacture. It's not the job of the government. Which means that the market is purely dominated by two forces of demand and supply. If people demand a product, there will be suppliers who will supply the product. When people stop demanding that product, it will be stopped making. For example, a pager. If you remember a pager, which was an invention of communication. People demanded pagers and there were a lot of companies making pagers. Now we got improved communication technologies, the pager demand lost and nobody's now making pagers today. So free markets will ensure that societies get what they feel is right for them. That's the underlying thought. Theory of utilitarianism is Jeremy Bentham's concept. This has been the thought behind the role of the economy. Unfortunately, the economy has failed on many counts. The first and the most important count it has failed in, which means it was not expected to do, is the distribution of income and wealth. It is about generating income. It is about generating wealth. But how it is distributed...
Equitable distribution is not part of the design.
Is not part of economic society. That is one thing. Costs, externalized costs that we talk about, are not part of economic problem. They are part of the ecology. Whatever pollution we generate, the atmosphere and the planet is large enough and benign enough to assimilate that pollution, and whatever little is troubling you, that the government can take care. So therefore, those costs are completely externalized out of the business economy. So it has failed there. It has failed to create new jobs. Every rise in GDP growth does not result in a commensurate rise in employment opportunities, for the simple reason that machines are better than humans. They're more reliable, they work 24/7, they work 365 days, they make lesser mistakes, they're cheaper, so on and so forth. So people want to replace, businesses want to replace people with machines, and automation reduces job opportunities. We know that, right? One ATM reduces the jobs of about a small branch of a bank.
Right.
Or one automatic FASTag replaces the jobs of the people who are sitting at the toll gates.
Right.
Things like that. So it's not the economy's job to create employment opportunity. It's the economy's job is to create wealth and income opportunities from that. Therefore, what happens is the economy becomes a treadmill of taking something from nature and putting it into the economic cycle and making money out of it.
And filling the pockets of the few.
So that is the next part of it. So it's a take, make, use, throw economy. And when you throw, the GDP rises. Because then you buy something new.
So it's linear.
It's not just linear, but it benefits from throwing. Because if I throw out these chairs and buy new ones, if you throw your mobile, if you buy new clothes, if you don't, then it generates a larger GDP.
This is the roaring 20s.
Concept. So being a linear economy and GDP growth is supported by the government. So what is now let's come to your part of it. What is the government's role in this? The government's role is to undo all the problems that the economy has generated.
So they are the safai.
Yeah. So, and who pays for it? Everybody pays for it. So even if I don't buy an SUV, I pay for the damage that the SUV manufacturing has and SUV use has created in the environment. Even if I don't want the Mars mission or the Moon mission, I have to pay for those costs of the Mars mission and the Moon mission.
Right.
So the taxpayer is inadvertently pulled into funding the ecological improvement or so-called ecological improvement. So thus the role of the government is to undo what the the remnants of the business economic growth have had into the ecology. And so therefore you see that tax money is used for pollution mitigation, for improving rivers, for riverfront development, for growing forest. All those things are then done by this money. And therefore, the one who benefits from the pollution is not the only person who's paying for the damages. It's everybody else who pays for the damages, but only he benefits from that. This is called as the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah. Is this an outcome of capitalism as the concept has been defined? Where it's rather than equitable distribution of profit, it is the concentration of profit in the hands of a few. And I'm taking the liberty of assuming that money concentrates power also. So who has got more money inadvertently will have more power, right? So then what is a good governance model? Like we were princely states before we got colonized, right? And there was a Raja who was apparently, who was supposed to take care of the Praja. Yeah, so that is one model. And then there is this democratic form of governance where the people elect these people. So we are to blame in this situation.
Yeah, so how do we improve the economic system? For that, you have to think about the prerequisite to that. How do we improve the governance system?
Right.
And how do we improve the governance system? How do we get into participative democracy? Is at the root of everything. So when you talked about we had empires and we had kingdoms and the kings took care of their subjects, they were essentially catering to a limited geographic area wherein the natural resources in that portion were being utilized and shared between the subjects. When you move from the concept of kingdom into nation, we had the false sense that the entire India is the same.
Homogeneous unit.
Yeah. And therefore, democracy works. So, centralization of planning is one of the biggest banes of the economy. The first 5-year plan, if you remember, 1951, the first 5-year plan talked about how the entire country should be ruled. Where should be agriculture, where should be industry, how should the education go? How is it even possible? If you look at India, there's a difference between India and, let's say, the European countries or the Russian countries or Japan. All these other countries are spread across a couple of latitudes. India spreads across 28.5 degrees latitude. The amount of sunlight reaching Kanyakumari is not the same as the amount of sunlight reaching Ladakh. The rainfall of Meghalaya is different from the rainfall of Kutch. The soil of Vidarbha is not the same as the soil of Konkan. We have phenomenal diversity in the country. Look at England.
There's just geological diversity.
Look at Germany. Look at France.
Fairly homogeneous.
There is no diversity there.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the reason that we have diversity of languages. This is the reason why we have a diversity in human-nature relationship. This is the reason why the ingredients of the sambar masala are different from the ingredients of the rajma masala.
Correct.
And somewhere we have lost this idea and we thought that centralization will lead to well-being of society. Now, that has not happened since the British left us, right? 75 years. And of course, the British have a lot of blame to put. But let's first look at ourselves and what we have to share the blame. So, participative, localized and decentralized. These are the three things which should actually be looked at.
Absolutely.
For example, you take a city like Pune. Today, Pune city borrows its waters from 3 different watersheds. We are borrowing it from Moshi, Ambi, Temghar. We don't care about what happens there and to the area. We are getting water in a pipe. If you go to a village, the village uses water resources which nature gives it, which they get from the hydrological cycle. They don't borrow it from 100 kilometers away, or they have not been able to borrow it because of our development policies. So they've been forced to use the resources carefully. So one way is looking at how far are our resources coming from, not just on the global scale, but even on the national scale. So for example, cities. are net guzzlers of resources.
Yeah.
A city like Mumbai borrows its energy from so many places.
Yeah.
It deforests areas of Vidarbha, of Jharkhand, of Chhattisgarh, where the coal is coming from to fund the economic growth of Mumbai city. Its water resources are coming from different areas. Its food is coming from completely different places, right from olives from Spain and Italy to groundnut from somewhere else.
Apples from New Zealand.
Apples from New Zealand, all of that. So the dazzle of economic growth makes us ignore the ecological damage because we are spatially so far away from the damage. So earlier part of our discussion was about our temporal distancing. You know, ocean acidification and Arctic is going to happen over 50 years.
Yeah.
It's a temporal dissociation.
Yeah.
But there's also a spatial dissociation. The forests of Hasdev forests are going down. I don't care about it from in Pune or Mumbai.
Yeah.
So both these distances, the spatial and the temporal distance, make us feel that economic growth is safe and sound. Nothing's going to happen.
Not coming at a cost.
It's not coming at a cost. And I'm not the one who's contributing to the damages.
I think there is such a fundamental shift in perspective where we have now surely tamed nature. And we are the dominant species wielding her at will. Because this was not even a question 100 years ago. We used to settle, humans or any animal used to settle where there was water, where there was food, where resources were plenty. Otherwise, we used to wander and find another place where we found some resource-rich natural reserve. But here we are sitting 100 years later, talking about, you know, how far our apples are coming from, and I mean, this was unheard of, right? So there have certainly been certain seismic shifts in technological progress that have enabled this. Let's not cast a dark shadow on all technological progress, right? The roads bring a lot of good with them, along with the bad things. Like I used to have this perspective. We used to go to remote villages of Himachal and there were no roads there. And I have visibly seen the difference in my lifetime. You know, in the span of 10 years, I've gone to a village where there was no road. The quality of life, the sweetness of people, the gentle and kind nature of everybody. And now there's a road, and first thing that happens is filled with hotels. And people are just more disconnected, I would say. I'm just using very broad terms here, but you get the drift, right? So we are the creators of this mass ecological disruption. And we have now tamed nature, and we can control her at will, unfortunately. Now, what do you see our role as? And I think we still got to manage the question of how can government control economy while keeping the ecological perspective, you know? Because I think now the role of the government is not just to clean up the garbage that the business creates. I think we are very near to a point where if they don't restrict the businesses from behaving at will, there may not be a country to run. And I'm sorry to paint such a gloomy picture, but I mean, I'm an optimist, but I'm trying to find the silver lining in this whole thing, you know. So, how can the government do that? Is the first question. And second question, on a broader scale, as humans, because everything's become global now, can we do something like a multilateral agreement or a set of rules or guidelines without offending the marginal nations while including the big nations? How do we solve this complex beast of a problem? Like, how would you start attacking this problem?
The complexity of the climate problem and the ecological problem is huge.
Yeah.
and it becomes so huge that it becomes formidable. It almost feels like you can't address the problem.
Yeah.
Unless you break it down into smaller pieces. So disaggregating the entire problem and placing the bits that economy needs to do in the economy container, placing the bits of lifestyle in the container of lifestyle, placing the bits of businesses in the businesses, placing the bits of globalization, of international cooperation, of similar things, then we see that these problems are all solvable. Unfortunately, what we still don't realize that all these buckets are interconnected.
Yeah.
You make a puncture in one bucket and everything else also starts getting empty. So they are interconnected. Many of their interconnections we don't realize. We only see the symptoms of the interconnections. We don't still realize what happens there in nature. And that is something which is a big problem. But we are able to disaggregate the problem and make it into smaller problems. So we know what is creating the problems. We know what actions need to be done. We know what the economy has to do, what the governments have to do, what international role is. But getting people to do these things is the challenge.
Implementation.
Yeah, the problem is not knowledge of the problem and knowledge of the solution. The problem is putting people on the same level to see the ecological, the nature emergency. And that is something which each one is looking at it from his perspective. Developed nations are saying the nature emergency is not so bad. Small island states in the Pacific Ocean are saying the nature emergency is here and now. Our islands are drowning in the sea, and there is no consensus on them. So I think the first thing, your question about international cooperation, I think the first thing which we must have is we should have international courts of climate justice, which we don't have. Somebody doesn't oblige with its commitments, Paris commitments, there is nothing that can be done.
Exactly.
There is no international pressure group. We can't go to the courts. We can't say that, okay, here you need to fulfill these things because these are not mandatory. So these are nationally determined commitments, NDCs as they are called. The nation determines what you will commit. And in the interest of its people and the voters, the nation always undercommits.
Yeah.
Many countries have tried to undercommit and overdeliver and then take a pat on the back. Right? We have over-delivered, but what they don't say is we have under-committed. You know, much more commitment should have come there. So that is not being done. So things like these need to change. And I think the most important point that needs to be changed is the sensitivity of the common man.
Exactly.
Right? We as individual denizens of the planet need to realize that what we are eating, what we are breathing, what we are buying, what we are putting into our houses are all leading us to an unhealthy and a life which is not on well-being but is based upon materiality. How many bedrooms do you have? How many cars are there in your garage? Do you have the latest phone? These are the questions which we feel make us happy. So that has to be transformed with, is the river in your locality
clean,
nice and drinkable? Can you take a walk in the forest for an hour without being disturbed by anybody? These are the kind of things which we need to look at. We are overpowered on the economic treadmill. Every day we wake up at 8 p.m., we go to work, we earn the money, come back at 8 p.m. in the evening, and on a weekend we splurge on shopping. So that is something which is taking away the connection, the spatial difference which I said between humans and nature is what they. So on one hand, we have to work on lifestyles and individual understanding. On the other hand, we have to work on governance, participative democracy, decentralized ways of solving problems. And on the third hand, we have to look at international cooperation.
Yeah, which is hugely complex because
it is complex. Because we
there's
are
a
not
lot of history, right?
Yeah, there is no one starting point.
Yeah.
Like in a marathon, everybody stands at the starting line, right? United States is ahead, Kiribati is way behind, India is somewhere in between, and therefore we are not agreeing that that should be the end point.
While that being said, the aspirations are also wrong. They are all misaligned. Like like you said, this is a very important part. Why is GDP the sole indicator that's looked at by even Indians? Why are we so fussed about GDP, right? While we have neighbors like Bhutan who have an alternate model, whose people clearly seem more happier than us, right? And while a neighbor of ours is passing regulations like compulsory 60% forest cover for the entire nation, why is our incumbent government pushing for GDP, right? I'm not scared to say this at all. I think the blame has to be on the citizens. I think we are voting with our money. I think we are voting with our aspirations. I think the villager wants to come to the city dweller wants to go to a bigger economy. And we are seeing this urbanization and, foreign migration happening all around us, right? This has been the story of the last 5 decades. So I think it would be prudent to focus our discussion on how do we switch this aspiration, right? Because I think if we do that, like most complex systems are built of 3 or 4 fundamental rules.
Yeah.
And if all the parties are following that rule, the whole complex system somehow, the flock of birds flying in the sky, making those patterns follow the same rule, So what can be that framework or that protocol of maybe behaviors or social contracts? Maybe we bring policy into this, How do we incentivize this? And we'll come to, I think money is the biggest incentive, right? Either you give penalty or you give a big monetary reward, and usually behaviors go in that direction, right? So we'll come to this point of money being used as an incentive or whatever. But what can be this framework to sort of drive this complex system in the right direction?
Yeah, again, a loaded question, and we need to break it up into smaller parts to be able to answer that. One is to understand how we look at the problem. Do we look at it as a problem of economic growth? Do we look at it as a problem of business profitability? Do we look at it as a problem of ecological damage, or what? So changing that perspective is fundamental to solving that problem. Right? So economic growth, like you said, GDP, why are we so fixated upon the GDP? If you look at GDP, what is it measuring? It's measuring growth. GDP includes all the money which moves around. Wars and terrorisms are very good for GDP. Epidemics, accidents, excellent for the GDP because they add money to that. On the other hand, the ecological damages are not even counted in the GDP. They're not reduced. The depletion of natural resources is not reduced. Polluted ecosystems is not reduced. Loss of ecosystem services is not reduced from the GDP. So GDP is a balance sheet with only one side.
So it's
a profit account, not a loss account at all. So if I were to present such a P&L to a chartered accountant, he would laugh at me and throw it on my face. Yeah. But you and I every day look at these figures saying, okay, India GDP is rising by 5%, it's good. Yeah. We don't see the damage which a 5% Absolutely. GDP growth has done. So one is understanding how we are measuring the economic growth. Second part is we have stopped realizing that GDP or growth is a means and development is the goal.
Right.
Right? The society needs development. Growth is just a means of how you reach development.
What is a good other metric for GDP?
Yeah, we'll come to that. So let's first look at what is growth and development. Growth is essentially a quantitative measure, while development is a qualitative measure. The number of hospitals in Maharashtra is growth. But how healthy is the society is development. So when the Ministry of Health tells you that last year we had 100 hospitals, this year we have 120, they are reporting growth.
You have more sick people in your state.
They are not reporting development. Right. So one is understanding that growth is just a means of reaching the goal, which is the development.
Right.
And therefore, economic growth needs to be replaced by economic well-being. The economy must cater to the well-being of society rather than growth as the goal.
Absolutely.
That is the first step that we have to look at. And therefore, a lot of things might change. So, for example, in my book, I've written that the responsibility of the health of the citizens must rest not with the Ministry of Health, but with the Ministry of Agriculture.
And the Ministry of Environment.
And the Ministry of Environment. But it now rests with the Ministry of Health, which continuously reports growth, not development. So another example in the growth development conundrum is that of schools. You look at the schools, Zilla Parishad schools, the Gram Panchayat schools in Maharashtra. The number of schools have increased. What about the quality of education? We can't even report that.
Yeah.
So successively the quality of education is going down. The kind of people who are coming today as school teachers are the people who are not getting other jobs.
Yeah.
So it's not a choice that they have made to become a school teacher, but it's out of a compulsion.
Yeah.
And imagine we are leaving the future citizens of the country in the hands of such people.
I know. It's scary.
So we don't care about the quality of education. We look at growth as something which is fundamental to that. We have stopped looking at development as a goal and growth as the only thing. The other perspective that we need to look at is how is the government solving these problems or trying to solve this problem. And I want to explain this with an example. And let's take the example of farmer suicides in India. We know that the farmer suicides have grown over the last couple of years. How has every government tried to solve this problem? One is it's trying to give them more electricity, more water and all that. But the easiest way to try to solve this problem is to give them loan waivers. Now look how government is seeing this problem. Government is looking at this problem as a problem that the farmer is unable to repay a debt. Which means the government is trying to solve a symptom.
Not the root cause.
Not the root cause. So we look at a symptom and we think that this is the problem, and then we try to solve that symptom. And since 75 years after independence, we have not been able to solve the problem of farmer suicide because we are addressing the symptom. The root cause lies somewhere else. That is something which needs to be fixed. Look at the problem of urban waste. Now, urban waste in a city like Pune is burgeoning. The city administration is incapable of solving that problem. It has less hands. It doesn't have the wherewithal. It doesn't have the managerial capabilities. None of that. We are trying to solve the problem by getting more waste incinerators, more landfills, more dump yards, all of that. That's treating the symptoms. So first is we need to relook at how we are trying to solve the problem. So this is the framework that we use in Center for Sustainable Development. We look at the symptoms, we try to connect the dots and find the root causes. We don't stop there. We go beyond that and find out what is driving behavior in the root causes. And at the next level, we try to look for levers which can change that behavior.
Exactly.
So every driver has a lever. And what would that lever be and how can we influence that? So you talked about policy and punishment and penalty and incentives. Those are levers.
Right.
Those levers might not work everywhere. Maybe to solve a problem, you need to change the lever of religion.
100%.
You need to get a God man say something, save soil or something like that, and then that happens. Maybe some root cause has a driver which can only be changed by penalty or by regulation. Maybe some driver can only be changed by influencer. Amitabh Bachchan comes and says, polio ka tika le lo. That has changed a lot of that. Maybe some driver can be changed by social pressure, right? So for example, fashion is typically social pressure. You know, if some influential person changes the way he or she dresses, then the youngsters who follow that, they change that. So there are various levers which we need to look at. And therefore, now we realize that it's not just the government who can change these levers. There could be society which can move a lever. There could be banks and financing which can move a lever. There could be local administration which can move a lever. There could be religion which can move a lever. There could be influencers which can move a lever. So there are various movers of these levers. And thus, we cannot say that the brunt of sustainable development lies solely on the government or lies solely on individuals like you and me. We are also being driven by some levers.
Absolutely.
So that is the way we need to look at this problem. First, disaggregate the big problem and put it into smaller bins. Look at the symptoms in the smaller bins. Look at the drivers of those symptoms and look at the levers.
Find the best lever and then activate effort on that lever.
Yeah, that's the
So
way.
let's connect this to the farmer suicide problem. Okay. Let's understand, let's do a root cause analysis on the farmer suicide problem, and let's understand what are the drivers or the levers driving farmer suicides. And then let's, I mean, for the benefit of the audience, it will illustrate a way of solving a problem, right? So, by the way, there's a beautiful line. Actually, you never solve a problem, you solve a bunch of problems, because the problem is never alone, right?
Alone,
It comes with its family and its cousins. So you always have to look at the bunch of problems. But yeah, I mean, so why are farmer suicides happening? Farmer suicides are happening because farmers are losing money. Farmers are losing money because what they are growing is not fetching as much as they are investing. So why are they growing what they are growing? So they are growing cotton, they are growing soya, they are growing all these different things. Why are they growing these things rather than growing food for themselves, which will enable them to sustain their life? Some societal problem may be there, right? Now, why are they growing cotton and soya? Because the government is incentivizing cotton and soya, right? So should we solve the problem at the level of the government where they stop the incentive of cotton and soya?
So government again is trying to fix a symptom.
Okay, let's go deeper.
Let's go deeper. So think about it. I mean, so the question that you need to address is, why are farmers borrowing money?
Okay.
Okay. So the question of why are farmers borrowing money, you need to look at a little bit of history of agriculture. Before the Green Revolution, okay, even before I get into that, let's say as a farmer, you write a business proposal. You want to borrow funds. You write a business proposal, and in that business proposal, there'll be at least about 15 times you will have an ifs and buts. Okay, and no financer would like to finance a proposal which has so many ifs and buts. If there is rain, then this happens. But there is this problem. Then there is locust problem. Then there is carnivore raid. Then there is herbivore. This is not going to happen. I will not eat. So it's a very weak business proposal, okay, a farmer's business proposal. But look what happened before the Green Revolution. The farmers. What is the Green Revolution? The Green Revolution essentially changed the way we did agriculture in a manner how we use the inputs to agriculture. And the biggest, most significant input to agriculture is the seeds. So in the Green Revolution, people worked upon removing the problems that individual seeds had, or reducing the problems and combining the good traits of various species into one species. And we got what we call as the high yielding varieties, HYVs. Which is something that came. But that came at a cost. And the cost of it was more fertilizers, more irrigation, and more mechanization.
You're saying this happened during the Green Revolution?
Yeah, it happened around the 1950s when Norman Borlaug went to Mexico to find out how the problem can be solved of the wheat. So the first hybridization happened in wheat, which was funded by two big foundations of America. And Norman Borlaug did a wonderful job. He was a scientist and he did what he was asked to do to improve the yield of the wheat in Mexico because it was feeding American population. So once that happened, then the other onus was given to him to improve the rice varieties, which he collaborated with the International Rice Institute in Philippines. Because the global south is a home to rice bowl. Rice bowl. So all of that was connected. But now when you take the high yielding varieties to the farmers, look at this. This has got a semantic problem. If you are a farmer and I approach you with high yielding varieties of rice, you automatically start feeling what you have is low yielding. Right? So as a businessman, you want higher yields. And you are attracted to an input which is going to give you higher yields. Leave aside what you're doing with that. But that higher yield comes at a higher input cost. You have to put more fertilizers, more pesticides, more irrigation. You have to do all of that. And on top of that, you have to buy the seeds. So a business proposal with 20 ifs and buts, if done without putting any money upfront, is still a viable business proposal.
Yeah.
But a business proposal with so many ifs and buts and putting lakhs of rupees and then after 6 months realizing that you're not going to make even 1 rupee out of it is a very bad business proposal.
Yeah.
So before the green revolutions, farmers did not need any money for cultivation of anything. They had their seeds, they had organic matter which they put as soil reinforcement, soil nourishment. They had the sources of either rain-fed or groundwater agriculture or whatever. And even if the monsoon failed or even if there was a crop damage after 3 to 4 months, they would not go bankrupt.
They had zero debt.
They had zero debt. They had less food, but they were protected with society. They were getting food.
Correct.
They were kept alive. Now, the only reason why they went into debt is because you needed upfront money before you started sowing anything.
Yeah.
And that upfront money is now you're going to realize that you can't pay it back only after 4 months.
Yeah.
So another very important difference between a business and agriculture is that agriculture has very long cash cycles. You sow today and you make money after 4 months. We are talking about farmer suicide and how do you fix the problem, right? So now where do you borrow? If you and I living in cities, we want to borrow to buy let's say a car, we would approach a bank. Are there enough banks in rural places?
No.
And are those branches empowered to take decisions about disbursing a loan?
Definitely not.
So before sowing, the farmer has to make multiple rounds to the taluka place or some other district place where there is a bank. And then that person has to wait for a month or so until the decision comes from the regional office or wherever, and then he gets the money.
Yeah.
Farmer can't wait because the season doesn't wait.
Yeah.
So the easier way out is to borrow money from local people. And we had all the saukari business for a very long time.
Yeah.
Many of the saukars are now replaced by the people who sell the farm inputs. So I go to buy seeds. And 100 rupee packet, he will sell to me for 175, but you pay me after 4 months.
Yeah.
So I've already taken 75 rupees interest up front. And it's equivalent to some ridiculous percentage of interest cost. I buy pesticides, I buy fertilizers, I buy it at higher than the maximum retail price. So which means the sellers of the inputs have become the creditors.
Yeah.
They let the loan because that's much easier way of flowing. The person knows the farmer.
Yeah.
He knows where his land
He
is.
knows exactly what he needs at that point in time.
And the farmer needs money at that time.
Yeah.
And this is the person who provides them. Now, after 3 months, if he is unable to pay that fellow, then he is not only defaulted on the capital, but also on the interest which he has already paid. So that becomes a huge issue for him.
Debt trap for him.
Debt trap for him. And this is how successive generations get poorer and poorer. And that is why, poverty in India is broken up into 2 buckets. One is chronic poverty, where you don't come out of poverty, and the other is transitionary poverty, where you do come out of poverty. So, for example, my house is 135 years old. Before that, my family was perhaps very poor. They came from Goa to Pune, and they built the wealth and the empire. Many farmer families who are living in rural parts of India, which have very poor rainfall, which are not connected by good roads, which probably don't get electricity for several days in a month, they are unable to come out of poverty successive generations because they don't get the means to come out of poverty. So now what becomes a suicide problem now turns into an infrastructure problem. So first, government needs to build infrastructure to be able to provide the farmer the means to come out of poverty. Then it has to provide the inputs to agriculture. If they are coming at a very high cost, then probably that's not the right agriculture for places which are facing severe brunt of climate damage, climate crisis. So now the problem doesn't become a problem of how do you give loan waivers and how much loan waivers and for how long a period do you give loan waivers, but it gets spilled over into infrastructure, into inputs, into farmer education, into prices, price discovery mechanism, all of those things. So then now you know where the levers of change are.
Yeah, I have to give you an example. We live on a farm in Mahabaleshwar, and I am seeing this firsthand. By the way, the language used by marketing is also very interesting. Poison is sold as medicine. They call it aushadha in Marathi. And the guys who have these shops who are selling pesticides are getting richer and richer, and they now have bungalows and their kids go to boarding schools, and they have sort of exited the poverty circle and they are really affluent. But exactly, you know, the farmer who's sort of buying medicines from these guys is getting poorer and poorer and poorer, and it plays out in the form of strawberry, which is a cash crop in Mahabaleshwar. And it literally, I mean, people have stopped doing strawberry slowly and progressively because they have realized it leaves them bankrupt, you know, which is so against the grain of nature and ecology, which is designed to create abundance. Like one grain or one straw of rice has hundreds of grains, which are technically seeds. So one straw, 1:200 is the ratio of abundance of nature. And still the farmer goes bankrupt. And I think this is the tragedy. This is the real tragedy, that no matter how, even as scientists, if we try to intellectualize this, compartmentalize this, we will not understand that if you remove all these mental models out of the equation and just let the farmer throw seed on a piece of farm and let nature do the farming, maybe that might just be like doing less might be doing more. In more things, you know, it has been my observation, especially with natural systems.
Yeah.
The lesser you intervene, the more nature figures out a better solution to it. Of course, you have to stop polluting, like you have to stop disrupting the system. But if you let it be, and if you observe, and if you intervene in the right way, nature is faster at getting to a solution than human beings. This has been my understanding. But yes, absolutely. Anecdotally, I have seen this happen. The pesticide guys are getting richer and the farmer is getting poorer. So clearly all the wrong incentives are being pulled. Which brings me to this this fact of power and influence and bureaucracy and lobbying and all these different things that happen. Like, it's common sense that overuse of pesticide is bad for food. It's common sense. But still it's being pushed into the market, right? Why is that happening? What can the government do to combat this issue? We know that the world needs to move away from petroleum. We know it needs to come closer to renewable resources of energy. But there is a very strong petroleum lobby that will not let this happen, right? And it's generational, multi-generational wealth that has been created. And so much money is at stake that, you know, it's very difficult to create that shift. How do you think this will come about, number one? And number two, now I think coming back full circle to the COP's thing of generating finance for climate action. I think we'll tackle it one by one. Let's first tackle the first question: is how do you go against the pressure of all these lobbies and do the right thing?
Yeah, and basically this question is directed towards the agricultural sector, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at, again, coming back to the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yeah.
What is its mandate? Its mandate is economic mandate. It needs to put money in the pockets of farmers. That's what the Ministry of Agriculture wants to do. That's the goal. The means is all haywire. Just think about the amount of land under non-food. It is growing by leaps and bounds. So, for example, sugarcane is not food. It's an industrial input.
Oh, I see.
Tobacco, coffee, tea, jute, rubber. All these are plantations which are not food. They are industrial inputs. So first and foremost, which I always mandated, that they should be kept out of agriculture. You can call them biomass industries, but don't call them agriculture.
Do they come under forestry? No.
They don't come under forestry at all. It's
all agriculture.
It's all agriculture. So one is that. And therefore, when you break that, when you only think about food growing as agriculture, then you know where your subsidies should be directed. Then you know where your incentives should be directed. Otherwise, everybody is benefited. The people who are growing tobacco also get benefited with all the benefits of agriculture, right? So those who are growing tea, coffee, all of these are things which are only afforded by the rich. So that we have to first separate out. Second is, we also have to look at what is the end use of what we are growing.
We have to separate out means someone will consult the Ministry of, I'm sorry, I'm getting into technicalities, but someone will sit with the Ministry of Agriculture
and separate out the biomass growers from the food growers.
And then what will happen? The Ministry of Agriculture will release a government GR.
No, yeah, I mean, we have to work that out. I mean, how the central government works is a little different. They don't work on GRs, but they need to separate out what will be the benefits. First is they need to separate out the beneficiaries. One is, like I said, you have a set of beneficiaries which are biomass cultivators. They are essentially cultivating biomass for industrial inputs.
Correct.
And then there are food cultivators.
Correct.
Who are helping the food security of the nation. And the entire package, agricultural package of practices should be directed towards food cultivators, not towards industrial inputs. Because inadvertently you are subsidizing industrial input, industry. You are not subsidizing food.
Which is where the money...
Yeah, which is already where the money is. These are not businesses of ifs and buts. They are businesses which are going to make money. They are going to be good return on investment. So that has to be separated out. Second is, you also need to look at, you said pesticide use, right? How do you reduce that? Imagine that you are a farmer in a large farming place like Mulshi or Mawad around Pune. And if you are the only one who doesn't use any pesticides, any fertilizers or anything, so everybody else around you is using pesticides. Where are all the pests going to come and flock?
On your farm.
On your farm.
Which is happening on my farm.
Exactly.
So
what that means is, the person who is getting into no pesticide use is the biggest sufferer of the pesticides.
Yeah.
On the other hand, those who are using pesticides are benefiting from it. So we have to stop looking at individual incentives or subsidies or penalties. We have to look at sector as something that we need to work upon. And there is a systemic change which needs to be done. Every year we are increasing the amount of subsidy we are giving to chemical fertilizers. And that is creating a problem. Every year we are, these are industrial outputs. These are industrial products. And therefore, economies of scale step in. As fertilizer companies grow, as pesticide companies grow, they're able to reduce their prices. And every reduction in price, there is an elasticity of demand. Then farmers start buying more. And that becomes a problem. So how are you looking at again, there is a growth development conundrum. On one side, as fertilizer and pesticide and seed companies grow, it's beneficial to the GDP.
Exactly.
On the other side, it's harmful to what it does to our food system.
And the farmer and the environment.
And the farmer and the environment. So is the farm output directed towards nourishment and satiety, or is it directed towards yield? And since Green Revolution, we have put yield on the pedestal and worshipped it by completely disregarding many other things. Before the Green Revolution, yield was not the only thing which mattered to the farmer.
It was the flavor, taste of rice.
It was the taste, it was the uniqueness, it was the amount of organic matter which he is going to give back to its soil.
The vigor of the plant, all these things.
It was all of this which mattered, and yield was also a very important component. But now we have disregarded everything and put yield on the pedestal, and we are only worshipping yield with subsidies and incentives and what have you. That needs to change dramatically. The third thing is, where are you directing that food? So for example, when I was in school, or even when my parents were young and they wanted to go out and buy a biscuit, they probably had just one choice. They had that Parle G biscuit or something. Today you walk in a supermarket in a biscuit rack, and you will walk for meters together and see different types of biscuits. You will see diabetes biscuits, oats biscuits, sandwich biscuits, alana falana, all of these biscuits. How much wheat are we directing towards making biscuits? Have we addressed this question? So which means those wheat farmers have also become an industrial input supplier. They are not making food.
This is the corn story of United States.
Corn
the high
story.
fructose corn syrup has replaced sugar.
Totally replaced
And now it's an industrial input.
So that way, are you making wheat for food or are you making wheat for biscuits, which is an industrial product? And are biscuits affordable by everybody? We have biscuits which are 500 rupees a kilo, 200 rupees a kilo. Those are not afforded by everybody. So we are directing farm output towards those people who can afford it. So it is directed towards affluent. Right? So that also needs to be monitored. How much of rice and wheat are you directing towards people who make noodles or companies which are making noodles? And successively, you can check that. I once did this experiment. There is a large company near Pune which makes potato chips, wafers as it is called in India. Very large international company. You stand near the materials inward gate and you see the number of potato trucks going in every shift. You'll be surprised at the amount of potatoes which are now cultivated for the chip business. Is that food? That's an industrial input. So we have to separate that out.
But it's a very blurred line, right?
Very blurred line. And then the proponents of free market economics will say you're
eating the chip ultimately.
Yeah,
so
you're making interventions in the marketplaces.
Yeah.
That's not something which is advised by economists.
But if economy starts eating itself, isn't it in the best interest? Like this is what, again, coming back. Like you established it that a business has a short-term view on everything because he wants profit now, right? But once a business is big enough, doesn't the business want the cycle of consumption to go on infinitely and increase infinitely? I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want these people to stay alive and keep consuming so that I can it's just such a dark perspective. But I want these people to stay alive and keep consuming so that I keep making more money.
Yeah.
Essentially, he has to have some long-term view on the climate and on human well-being and stuff like that. So when does that kick into the conscience of a business? And I don't want to paint businesses as dark entities or whatever. Business can do a lot of good, right? But why is there no long-term view on this? Or is there some weird way in which they ensure that you will live long enough? So you know what's happening, like disease is increasing, just as you were mentioning this, right? Like disease is increasing as hospitals are increasing, right? So how do we incentivize a business to take the long-term view? This is my specific question to you. Is there a way to do it?
Yeah. So think about it. You're a businessman in a sector. Let's say you're making chairs and everybody, there are other competitors who are also making chairs. But you're a good business. You're doing your bit. You're using reprocessed material. You're consuming less of non-renewable resources. You're using technologies which will completely reduce the pollution that you have. You're doing all of this which are good for the ecology and for the long term of the planet. You're not just looking at profit. Now, you are one among a sector of chair manufacturers whose costs are higher than the others. And therefore, the price is dictated by the equilibrium price, but costs are dictated by what you do. And you choose to do something which is good for the planet, and therefore you raise your cost. Therefore, you are pushing up your floor. The ceiling is the price. Others have a floor which is lower than you, and they have a higher profit margin. But your floor is here and your ceiling is here. You can't push the price up. So you're going to make less money. And you stand to lose out on doing business completely because you are unable to do so. So therefore, when an individual tries to do something good in a business and the others are not obliged to follow that person, then that person increases his costs of doing business and he might go out of business. Thus comes in policy. That is where the government is important. That is where the government should insist that there has to be a policy of how much pollution, who pays for the pollution, how many renewables do you use, how many times you recycle your product. All this needs to be changed by policy, and not just by policy, by rules and regulation. Policy is just a guideline. When it is converted into rules and regulation, then it becomes enforceable.
Exactly.
So that needs to happen. And that is the biggest role of the government.
Yeah.
Right? That is one part of it.
Yeah.
Second is, like we said, you're reporting to a board of directors and the board of directors wants to see growth quarter on quarter. That's the other thing. You also look at governance and policymakers. They are going to be in the office for 5 years. They can't show that you have done wonders to the Arctic snow or the cryosphere or the ocean acidification in 5 years back. But they are able to show that you have grown the GDP in 5 years.
Yeah.
And their entire intention of putting policies in place is that so that the next time the voting goes around, their party or they will get the vote.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, there are only so many things which you can show.
Right.
So that is also something which needs to be fixed. We need to fix the way governance is there, the democracy is there, how people vote, all of this. But I want to stop here and push the camera onto the consumers. Right? And we always feel as consumers, we need to do something. We are wrong. We are putting the pressure and the businesses only responding to what we demand. We want more mobile phones. They make the mobile phones because so on and so forth. But think about it. As consumers, do we really have free will?
Was my question.
Yeah.
Who's driving your aspiration?
Exactly.
Right?
So that question of free will is something which we need to introspect on. And then you realize that it's not free will. Your choice depends a lot upon what is available in the marketplace.
Also, where you sit on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
That is also the other thing. But your choice is, consumption-driven economic growth. This is called as consumption-driven economic. The more you consume, the more the economic growth. Consumption-driven economic growth rests on 2 C's, comparison and competition. You always compare yourself within the circles that you move. My brother-in-law has a 4-bedroom apartment and I have a 2-bedroom. I need to, my friend has bought an SUV. I need to do that. My friends have taken their vacation in Switzerland. So I need to do that. So comparison becomes a huge driver of consumption. And the second is competition. You compete every day at work with the person next to you. You want to grow faster. You want to attain the position of a CXO. So you are competing in that world. And that competition also stops you from realizing what your values are. So for example, in my house, we don't use disposable cups for chai.
Yeah.
We don't use paper tissues.
Yeah.
We don't generate waste. We don't do litter. But I go to work in an IT company and do all of that.
Yeah.
So I don't realize that I have succumbed to the values that somebody else has.
Yeah.
And I have left my values in my house. So I behave entirely differently when I reach home. I grow trees, I conserve nature, I do all of that. But at work, I don't do any of that. So I'm a different personality at work. So that needs to change. And for that, there is no policy which can change, but there are influencers. There are the CXOs, the CEOs who can make policies for their company. They are the ones who can drive. For example, a CEO can say, next meeting onwards, no consumable water bottles will be kept, 200 milliliter water bottles.
No paper cups allowed in the
No paper
office.
cups. You want water, you get your own bottle. Is that difficult?
Yeah, not at all.
Not at all. Can the CEO make such a policy? Of course he can. Why doesn't he or she do? It's something to do with awareness. Is that going to change the way she reports to the board? No. It's not going to change their profitability. Will it reduce the amount of plastic which that companies makes? Yes, it will.
I suspect it will affect their profitability. I think the goodwill will trickle into
Improve it, yeah, correct.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a company that consumers will appreciate and
Exactly.
they will consume, and
Exactly.
all these beautiful things can come out of it.
So a simple policy of saying no to plastic water bottles can do so many goods, and it is enforceable. You don't need the government to do it. You don't need World Trade Organization to tell you that.
Yeah.
You just need the aspiration of a CEO or a CXO to say that. Right?
I love this
That's-
idea. Yeah.
So one of the things that we are doing in the Center for Sustainable Development is that we say that policymakers are not sitting in Delhi and Mumbai. Policymakers are everywhere around you.
Break it down.
I can make the policy for my own house. We will not use shopping bag. We'll always use a cotton bag. We will always use a public transport one day in a week. I make a policy for my house. There are policy makers in schools. The principal can make a policy.
I was just going to get there. Yeah.
Can say that we will not allow plastic water bottles. We will not allow plastic tiffins. And we are doing that not because it's plastic is bad in the garbage system, but it is generating microplastics in your thing. So we are working with over 300 schools who have signed up for our Mission City Chakra program. There we are doing a surgical strike on 3 things: plastic water bottles, plastic dabbas, and plastic laminated brown paper covers. When I was in school, we never had laminated brown paper covers. We used to use newspapers to cover our books.
Yeah.
It was so easily to do, right? So what we do, a lot of NGOs work on awareness, but they work on awareness of the problem. They don't work on awareness of solutions. We go to the principal and say that here's a problem. The principal knows the problem of plastic waste and microplastic, and here's the solution. You can make a policy.
Correct.
And he suddenly fears, oh, yes, of course I can make a policy. 300 schools have signed up voluntarily for this program. And what we go to the parent-teachers meeting and say, we are not even talking about garbage and plastic. We tell the parents, imagine that your son or daughter from age 5 to age 15 drinks water from a plastic bottle and eats food from a plastic container. How many microplastic grams are going to get into his or her body? And the parent immediately says, I understand the problem. You don't even make a policy. I'm going to change it myself.
So I think is the solution bringing forth the immediacy or the proximity of the issue with yourself?
So there are 2 ways.
How is it affecting me? Once the individual realizes this, then action happens.
Yeah.
Right?
So there are 2 triggers. Right? Now we move from a lever to a trigger. What can trigger action? We have looked at levers. Now let's look at triggers. There are 2 very significant triggers. One is it is economically beneficial or it promises better health.
I think the economic benefit will overpower the health benefit.
But think about it. When you are a young mother or a young father, the health trigger works better. I am talking about your child.
I agree. Yeah.
Can get a better quality of life, can get better health, can have lesser diseases, can improve his or her power to fight diseases. That is a much better trigger than saving money. Right? So you appeal to that trigger and then you allow somebody to be a policy maker there. And that works well. So now we have taken this program to corporates and we are saying zero waste meeting. Is it possible? And we show them it's possible.
Zero waste weddings.
Zero waste wedding. Zero waste pantry. Zero waste toilet. And the CEO realizes, yes, I can make policies for all this. And employees also feel better because their company is doing, because that is how they work at home. They don't use disposable cups. They don't use plastic, single-use plastic, but they do so there. So there are, we just open up. So the chairman of a housing society is a policy maker for that society.
Yes.
A president of a Rotary Club can make policies for how the Rotary Club meetings can happen, zero waste meetings. So there are policy makers everywhere. All you need to do is show them that you are empowered to make a policy and what are the solutions that are better than what you were doing yesterday. There is no green action. There is a greener action. You are a little greener than what you were yesterday.
Yeah.
So this is a transitionary path. And showing policy makers and showing people that they can make these policies and the means to do them have helped us in our journey.
It's incredibly empowering. I can see why this is working.
Yeah.
And I love this idea. I think we need to go away from centralized action. We have to go to decentralized action. Empower local leaders to sort of take initiative and take a step towards the environment and bring awareness around the benefits of being in line with nature rather than taming her or mastering her. I think this is amazing. Going towards a slightly lighter direction. In all the years that I've known you, I've always been extremely curious how you manage your time. And a lot of people, especially aspiring, ambitious people who are listening to this podcast must be thinking, because you're an author, you're a professor, you head sustainability at Gokhale. You do wood crafting. You are a revolutionary. You go on. You go and revolt against injustice towards the environment. So you can be seen on the street somewhere. You are giving a talk somewhere. You just came back from Baku, Azerbaijan. So how is one man doing all these things? What is a typical day in your life? What does it look like? Like, how are you doing?
The first question which you asked me, how do you manage your time? If you were to ask this question to my friends, they would say he's the worst time manager of the world, because I overcome it and give all sorts of multiple commitments, and I'm unable to fulfill all of that. So don't ask me that question. I'll be a very poor role model to somebody who wants to really manage his time well. I use a Google Calendar to do that, and many times I fail myself and the calendar also fails me. So that's one thing. But yeah, how do I keep this alive? I think if you look at the underlying passion, it's about ecology, it's about economy-ecology relationship. And it manifests out of, let's say, a book or a talk or a trek or some activism or whatever that. So these are forms of manifestation. But the underlying thread for all this is the same. Therefore, I am not doing many things. I am just doing one thing. The manifestation comes out in several other things.
No, that's being modest. But I mean, finishing a book is no easy task, right?
Yeah,
you have
that's
done so many
important.
translations, and so
Yes.
finishing something, having the discipline to go at it day after day, because it's not a spurt.
That's right.
Right? It's a consistent delivery of things. So how did that come in?
So my first book, Anarthashastra. Arthashastra in Marathi is economics. Anarthashastra means lack of prudence. Anartha means something which is wrong.
Right.
So Anarthashastra. And I wrote that book thinking that how do you simplify the problem of sustainable development, climate change? It didn't take very long for me, because the way I figured out this problem, I simply put it into Marathi. And it became a very small book. I think it's hardly about 130, 40 pages. But my first book, I was awarded the Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad Puraskar for economic literature.
That's amazing.
Now that was a very strong motivation. Then I said, I mean, this book is getting recognition of the state government. It's getting sold. It's run into multiple editions. There are other people, for example, a very renowned author like Achyut Godbole. He came on stage and talked about my book. In his next book, he wrote about my book. So it was kind of going a lot of places. Then I said that this is just half the story of sustainability. Let me write on agriculture of India. And that also was
well received, yeah.
well received. I mean, that got the Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad Puraskar.
Right.
The first one got the Maharashtra Literature Award. This one got the Sahitya Parishad.
High accolade.
So
especially for a non-Marathi.
Exactly.
Thinker.
And that's also run into several editions now. The translation, Hidden Life of Trees, has already, I mean, before it was published, it was out of stock
It's an
almost.
amazing book.
That's because
Yeah.
of Peter Wolleben, not because of
Yeah.
my translation, because that's a very interesting book for anybody who's into plantations, trees and restoration. So that was my journey. And then I've written several books, a couple of academic books also. Springer Nature has published 2 of my books recently. One is called The Intersection of Ecology and Economy, and the second one is The Economics of Sustainable Development. So they are selling well across the world, because Springer is an international publisher, and they're being sold. So such things I have been doing. And that satisfies me, because I'm able to convey my perspective to common people. And the kind of feedback I receive is very good. I mean, people realize what they are doing needs to change. And they are the change makers, not somebody else sitting in Delhi or Bombay or, conference of parties. It's they themselves and their households that can make a difference.
Amazing. So what books sit by your bedside table right now? And do you gift books to people? By the way?
Yeah. I do gift books, and I also love to accept books as gift. So both ways it
Amazing.
works. So right now I am reading Amitav Ghosh's The Curse of the Nutmeg, for example.
Oh, amazing
I have
book.
just recently been gifted the latest book of Richard Dawkins. I forget the name, but it's a recently published book of his, which I intend to start very soon. So these are the kind of books which kind of trigger the thought process in my mind. And some of the books are, they have to be in myself. So, for example, Madhav Gadgil's works, This Fissured Land, or Ramchandra Guha's works, or
Guns, Germs and Steel.
yeah, Jared Diamond's works. All of those are, of course, there. Then I also have a lot of books by E.O. Wilson, Edward O. Wilson, who was a human ecologist from Harvard. Excellent books. I have a lot of Marathi books also by Nanda Khare, who has written many books in Marathi on sustainable development. My friend Atul Devulgaonkar, his books. So that forms that. But I have a lot of books.
Well, I think let's end with one question that is me forcing you to crystallize your message to the world. If I were to give you a billboard, Gurudas, which would be open to the entire human population for 24 hours. This billboard would be seen by the whole human race for 24 hours. What would that billboard say?
It's difficult to answer. There are at least a couple of things which I would like to put on.
Okay, let's do a couple of things.
So first is I would acknowledge the fact that that billboard will be read by people who are well educated, who have access to thought leadership and things like that, and there are people who are less educated and good intentioned people. So let's say I'll devote half the space to the people who understand the problem and half the people to people who don't understand. To the people who understand the problem, I would write the sentence which I love by E.O. Wilson. He said that in nature there is no right and wrong, there are just consequences. That's very important to understand. And on the part for the masses, I would write my 7R framework. I can refuse things. I can make a difference simply by refusing to overbuy, overpurchase, over-extract, over-consume. I can reduce things. I can do so many things. I just want to show hope to the people who are there at the bottom of the pyramid.
I think we'll have to do a round two, Gurudas. But this has been a deeply enriching conversation. I think I still have so many questions, honestly. But I think let's breathe a little. Let this sink in. And I think it would be a good idea to elicit questions from our viewers and our listeners and then answer focused questions around this subject. But thank you for this beautiful this tends to happen with ecological conversations, right? You can't stick to one thing because it is all transdisciplinary and interconnected. But I personally think, to sum this up properly, the onus is on us. As people, we have more power than any institution out there to effect a change. And this issue is at our doorstep now. I don't think we can dust it off anymore. And in our own right, as much awareness we can create to in our spheres of influence, I think we should do this. And let's hope that sense prevails and we don't end up being the only species that caused its own extinction.
Yeah.
So on this note, I think we have a small token of appreciation for you for giving us this time. So this is our step towards a greener planet. It has some honey.
Okay. That's nice.
Karvi is blooming in Mahabaleshwar right now. So we captured that honey. So it's Karvi honey.
Very nice.
And we make some dishwashers and detergents from bioenzymes and charcoal and all natural things. So we have a sponsor for this podcast. There are some good-natured folks who are supporting this work. Like I said, finance and money is an enabler. It enables people like us to create content like this and distribute it to the world. So they put shenkhat and a few more additives and they call it Green Harvest and Green Harvest Special. Excellent results. It has increased my organic carbon. It has increased beneficial microbes. The soil texture has improved. And I have found some really nice results.
So that's the kind of GDP growth we want. Absolutely. We want such companies to grow. That is the green GDP for the country. Absolutely. If we are able to create more companies who are well-intentioned and making money on their good intention, then that's the GDP which we want.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful point to close on. I think making money is not a bad thing.
Not at
It's
all.
a very good thing, but it should signify the holistic value that you have created, not just to humans, but to the biosphere as a whole.
right.
And if you have that perspective, businesses are awesome. I think everyone should start a business and do some good work like this. So on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was an
a pleasure.
absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time with us.
If you like that video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell icon so that you never miss the next episode of The Root Cause.